I trust everyone is doing great. My name is John Robinson. I'm excited about bringing this information to you. And being today, let me share my screen real quick. Let's jump into it. You know, here we're excited at OIC 10K. We're part of our Infinite Company, and we're a group that's known as OIC 10K. And so we're excited about bringing this information to our community. You know, this is free information. We want you to invite your friends, your family, all the people that love to borrow money from you and all that. This is who you need to invite to this. They don't need to register. They don't need to give us your phone number and your email address. None of that. Just come and get the free information. So we're going to just jump into this another great topic for our community. And as my host said earlier, we're going to be talking about winning with a financial needs analysis. This is part two. Last week we did part one. We talked about budgeting, and business director Erica Ba did an excellent job keeping it simple, keeping it basic, but bringing a lot of great information. And so here we are very committed to bringing the top shelf information to our community, but bringing it in a basic manner that anyone can understand. I realized that it doesn't matter what you're trying to tell someone. If you don't speak their language, they're not going to benefit from it. And we want everyone to benefit from this. So Ed, I appreciate that kind um, introduction, business director Ed Sprague, and he's got me all fired up, and I'm ready to talk about assets and liabilities. Assets and liabilities. All righty, let's go right into it. So, winning with a financial needs analysis. The reason we call it this series winning with a financial needs analysis is because that is a great tool, and we're going to talk some more about that in one of these sessions. We're going to just go ahead on and break down the financial needs analysis or put it all together, because we're taking this different aspects of it to bring this information to the community, right? And so we're gonna really put it all together again for you so that you guys can see it. I'm gonna keep my stopwatch going because y'all know I always got a bunch of slides. I can go forever, but we're gonna keep this to about 15 or so minutes. And so we're looking at the assets and liabilities. You know, uh, sometimes we have the information crossed up. Sometimes we don't realize that what we think is an asset is actually a liability. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So let's break it down, right? The basics of financial education when it comes to assets and liabilities in a clear and simple way. Here we go. So let's talk about assets. Assets are things that you own, right? That have value, things that have value, you know, and they can help you generate income or increase your net worth, right? So examples here, you're looking at cash. If you have cash, is good, right? Investments like stocks and bonds and mutual funds and so on. So those are supposed to be assets. Now, when you have a lot of stocks that are losing money, it kind of dancing between the asset and the liability line. You know, it's kind of going back and forth. But you know, those are normally considered assets. Real estate, right? Especially if you have rental property. Rental property can be great assets. And then sometimes those assets can become liabilities. You got a rental property, it's not rented out properly, or it's not rented out. So now you have to put out money to keep it up, taxes, all of that. Now it's no longer an asset. It moved over to the liability column, right? Businesses, you know, when you own a business is to make money. If you're consistently losing money, that asset is confused. That asset is not sure what side of the line it needs to be on. right? Vehicles, if you have a good vehicle, help you get to work, help you get to your place of business, helps you do things that generate income. Now that's an asset for you, right? And then intellectual property, books, patents, trademarks, audios, things that make you money. Those are your assets. You want to be clear uh, because there's a need to have that balance between assets and liability. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So, liabilities. Liabilities are debt or obligations, right? And these are things that you owe and take money out of your pocket. These things take money out of your pocket. So, an example of liabilities are credit card, right? Student loans, right? Car loans. Now, see, student loans are a little tricky because student loans in the beginning, when it helps you to get that education to have a higher income, it's kind of a, a worthwhile liability. The only problem is when it's not calculated right, and so it becomes a loan, but it's not earning you enough income to give you the lifestyle you need and take care of the loan in a short period of time. Now it's big time on the liability side, right? Car loans, mortgage, right? It's a liability until fully paid off, right? Personal loans, uh, business debt. Right? These are examples of liabilities. So the thing is this: assets put money in your pocket, help you build wealth. Liabilities take money out of your pocket and can hold you back financially. Right? So in life there is a balance between assets and liabilities. Any good business has assets and liabilities. Any good financial enterprise or system has a balance between assets and liabilities. And usually when a business gets started, the liability column is very fat. I mean, there's a lot going on there. And the assets column is full of potential. It's full of potential, right? And then once your business gets going and you start to generate income, now your asset column starts to really grow, and that's what you want. One thing that I learned early on in life is that as an employee, you are an asset to the company. But then again, you also factor in on the liability column, right? And so you got to be real careful because when your liability is perceived to be greater than the asset that you are, then that's when they may decide to part ways, right? So it's important to know your worth and to know, you know, how valuable are you to the company? What are you really bringing into the company? Knowing your value. And listen, it's that thing fluctuates like the stock market sometimes because at one time they love you when you're doing a great job, money coming in, and then when things level off, you're still doing a great job, but all they see is your money going out, and so that it goes up and down. A very wise guy I know, uh, says this: any asset left unprotected runs the risk of becoming a tremendous liability. And just a quick example of that. Imagine having a rental property, right? But you don't have it insured. So now you rent it out, but you don't insure it, and somebody hurts themselves on your property. I promise you, with as soon as they get to a lawyer, that asset is going to feel like a tremendous liability, right? And so there's got to be a balance, and assets have the ability to earn money, but usually anything that has the ability to earn money, for the most part, can flip the switch and become a liability. So you want to make sure that you protect your assets properly. Now, the net worth formula, and this term is a new term for a lot of people. Many people that I deal with have no idea as to how to determine their net worth. And it's pretty simple. You take your assets minus your liabilities, and that's going to let you know what your net worth is. So this is a basic snapshot of your financial health. If you have more assets than liabilities, you're in a good position. But if your liabilities are more than your assets, well, putting it nicely, it's time to make adjustments. That's putting it nicely. I could say you're in trouble, but I wouldn't say that. I would just say it's time to make adjustments. All right. So simple tips here. All right. Uh, increase your assets. I tell people all the time that you need to have an increasing income strategy. An increasing income strategy. So if you focus on acquiring things that appreciate or generate income, you know, businesses, some investments, real estate, some of these things or or assets that can increase in value and put you in a good position, right? And then you want to limit your liabilities. Be cautious with debt. You know, only borrow when it supports an asset creation. Borrow when it supports an asset creation. That is a very good uh, formula to use there. If I'm going to borrow, great, but why am I going to borrow? What is it going to do? So when we look at the things that we borrow for, if you're borrowing for uh, you know, you have a mortgage, so you borrow the money to have a home, somewhere to live, so on and so forth. That's awesome, right? That really need to be managed because a home um, doesn't really generate income like some of the other assets. A home, for the most part, is great to live in. It's great to live in. Now, if you stay in a home long enough, and all things being equal, it will increase in value. But also, you've got to maintain it and keep it insured and so on and so forth. So that's a good deal. But, I heard a very wise, uh, financial advisor said one time, buy a home for your family and for you to live in, and you have a good place to rest and to grow and raise a family, so on. He said, don't buy a home for investments because that could go any kind of way. And if you really crunch the numbers, it may not be a great investment at the end of the day. But you buy a home because you want peace of mind, you want your family protected, you want a great place to grow a family. So that's just some additional tips on that, right? Know the difference between good debt and bad debt, right? And so this is important because people think being out of debt is developing wealth, and that's not necessarily true. You can have no debt and still be broke. You can have no debt and still not keeping up with inflation. And so debt is something to be managed. Credit cards is definitely one of those things that you don't want to play with, right? And so good debt is, helps you build assets, mortgage and rental property and so on, and businesses, invest in a business, invest in education, invest in getting more education or licenses or different things like that. Bad debt is just consumes your money without returns, or you got credit card and just for lifestyle spending, you know. So those are things that you want to definitely manage. Okay. Now, going back to assets and liabilities, one thing that I want to to make a note of, and it's not listed here. When we look at the liabilities, we look at credit cards, student loans, car loans, mortgage, and so on and so forth. But now there's some other things that we don't realize that are tremendous liabilities. Sometimes you may have to take care of a family member. But I mean, we love our family, but at the end of the day, you got to do the numbers. It's dollars and cents, right? And so certain things that you do increase your outgo. And anytime it's outgoing is a liability for the most part, right? Um, if you're trying to maintain a property that is not generating any kind of income and it's not giving you any tax write-off and things like that, that's another liability. A lot of times we don't know what to put in a budget to do it correctly. But make no mistake, whether you know what to call it or not, it still affects your money. Does that make sense? If people say, well, what you don't know don't hurt you. Don't believe that. Do not believe that. What you don't know could be a train coming right at you, right? So it's important to put things in the right column, and it's important to calculate everything, right? Even if you're thinking about, let's say, working from home. Well, good. Working from home is a great thing, and you may save in gas. But now, what about electricity? You got more electrical use, and so it's a matter of understanding how to balance these things. And like I said, Business Director Erica did a great job with budgeting. But assets and liabilities, knowing how to look at this as far as a family is concerned, knowing how to look at this as far as a business is concerned is absolutely important. You've got to do it when it comes to business. You must understand the two different columns. And I talked about uh, employees being assets of the company, but got to remember employees also factor in on the liability side because they're thinking about your salary, they're thinking about your benefits, they're thinking about your vacation. You know, we got to pay you, but you're not here working. And so all of that factors into the liability column. But now the same models we use for business, we've got to bring it home and balance the assets and the liability and understand that. So look, I've enjoyed sharing this information. We want to keep it simple. There's a whole lot more that we can talk about as far as assets and liabilities, but we only have a few minutes to do that. And so we want to stay within our time. My name is John Robinson. I want to thank you guys for being here with us and allowing us to share this information with the community. We're looking forward to talk about this again on Thursday, and we're going to put a little bit more into it to give you